So, good morning. Today we're on lesson 9 of the workbook of A Course in Miracles. And, the more I look at these lessons, the whole workbook, if not the entire course, is so brilliantly put together as to be foolproof. And, in a sense, lesson 9 points to that. I remember when we set out and began the lessons, I mentioned that it might be helpful to check the introduction to the lesson, to workbook lessons, every so often, if not every day, for the first however long period of time, say a month or so, because we have a tendency to forget. We're still living in a condition of forgetting. Loss of remembrance and recognition of our true reality of who we really are. And until we've had sufficient enough experiences so that the question, the impossible question, how did the impossible happen, that the ego asks in a myriad number of ways. And it's really the underlying question behind every question the ego asks. How did the impossible happen? How did the impossible happen? Until sufficient enough experiences have come, until at an experiential level, the question, how did the impossible happen? Until that question is satisfactorily answered experientially in your own mind and heart, the ego will still be able to hook you into thinking that the impossible did happen and set your attempt at understanding in a direction where understanding is not possible. There's several times in the course where he admonishes us not to try to understand what is not understandable, to recognize the insanity behind what isn't understandable, and to turn our mind over to that spot, to that point where the light is able to get in and we're be able to experientially have a moment with the spirit of wholeness, so that the confusion or that descent into the darkness no longer has to proceed at all, has to start at all. I mean, we could stop in a moment and recognize, wait, this is not understandable, simply because it's not real, it's not true. And I'm glad to see in lesson 9 that the author of A Course in Miracles, the author of this workbook, brings our attention back to the fundamental reasons why we're doing these lessons in the first place, and admonishes us, helps us reverse cause and effect, as we did in yesterday's lesson as well, when he said yesterday that nothing I see means anything. My mind is preoccupied with past thoughts, and when your mind is preoccupied with past thoughts, it's really not thinking at all. Now, if it's really not thinking at all, and there is no reality to the thinking, to the thoughts, then it's not possible for them to have true effects. So it's not possible to effectively cause anything, because there's no causation in what is unreal and untrue. And that's one of the fundamental tenets of A Course in Miracles is reversing effect and cause. We've given cause to effect and allow the effects to seem to be causing what's happened to us. And that these are the lessons that are reversing that, are changing the temporal order, attempting to change entirely the thought system. These individual lessons, working on the thoughts that they are, although they seem to be, things that may be surface, we're putting our attention on some of our surface level thinking. At any point in time, the underpinnings of the ego can collapse with the recognition of any thought being untrue, unreal, and not having any causation. And at that moment, the entire ego thought system that all of your thinking, all of your life has been based on, can go. And in that moment, which, we may experience the onset of that to be wrought with fear and anxiety, the fear and the anxiety is only being presented by the ego as a warning for us not to go in that direction, because it is the end of the entire thought system of the ego. If any underpinning, if any one single thought upon which the whole ego illusion has been structured in your mind and your heart, it is, in a sense, shown to be untrue. Everything that's built on it collapses. Now, to the ego and the person experiencing that with your untrained mind, that could be seen as disaster. However, when looked at in the light of the purpose that we're attempting to achieve through the utilization of the lessons, it's success. And I think the beginning paragraph of lesson 9 points directly to this when he says, this idea, I see nothing as it is now. This idea obviously follows from the two preceding ones. And those are, I see only the past, and my mind is preoccupied with past thoughts. But while you may be able to accept it intellectually, it is unlikely that it will mean anything to you. However, understanding is not necessary at this point. Understanding is the booby prize at this point, because all of our understanding, which has been based on this egoic thought system, which is constantly asking the same question over and over again, how did the impossible happen? All of the understanding that's based on that thought system and is fueled by the ego asking that question over and over again is entirely wrong. It's entirely false. There's no help in it whatsoever. So he says you may accept it intellectually. It is unlikely that it will mean anything to you as yet. However, understanding is not necessary at this point. And he goes further. In fact, the recognition that you do not understand is the prerequisite for undoing your false ideas. The idea, the thought, that, oh, I don't understand, not as a judgment to make you feel worse about yourself or less than, but the idea that you don't understand is an opening in your mind to a new way of coming to know, a new way of learning. So if for a second, let's say, for a second, we're going along in our regular day, in the course of our day, I don't see the typewriter as it is now. I don't see the telephone as it is now. I don't see anything as it is now. Okay, if in the course of the day, all of a sudden, we're in a situation and it feels like our life is dependent upon us understanding something, or the need to understand seems to be paramount in our mind, yet it's obvious that there's some confusion around our understanding because we even have the need to understand. If at any moment like that, we stop the attempt to understand without being critical and using our lack of understanding as a weapon against us, if we can open-mindedly, and as he says at the end, in honesty, come into a moment where our not understanding is actually a question in our mind, the light of understanding of the Holy Spirit then has a space to enter in and begin to help us see things in a new way. Not that we will understand things in the old manner and everything will fit nice and neatly into a box, but the light of understanding, which is the Holy Spirit, will give us a new way of looking at this to allow us to no longer let the ego have its way and determine what it is we're attempting to understand and why here, based on its mandate to live in sickness, pain, suffering, and death. Now, I don't know if that was clear, but we do have somewhere in our mind and our heart the truth does abide. And as he says, as we will continue to read, is in fact the recognition that you do not understand is a prerequisite for undoing your false ideas. These exercises are concerned with practice, not with understanding. You do not need to practice what you already understand. It would indeed be circular to aim at understanding and assume that you already have it. So the assumption here is that I know you think you understand what's going on, but the understanding is always from the ego perspective of asking the question and trying to prove that the impossible did happen. How did the impossible happen? And you build up this case as to how it happened until the question itself is obscured by the need to maintain the case that you built up. Does that make sense? So the ego starts, how did the impossible happen? And we build up this reasonability and logic till we're so far removed from how did this happen that we're no longer asking honest questions in our own mind. We're just asking questions that validate a thought system that keeps us living in this maze of misperception and misconception as if they were true and as if we needed to continue to pursue the truth of that in order to maintain our life here. And that's not true. It goes on to say it is difficult for an untrained mind to believe that what it seems to picture is not there. This idea can be quite disturbing and may meet with active resistance in any number of forms. It's like the same idea as the question, how did the impossible happen? Is asked over and over and over again by the ego in 1,000 forms, 1,000 times a day. And every time we attempt to answer that question, we validate the fact that the impossible did happen, when in fact the impossible could never have happened because it is impossible. It's impossible for God to create something that isn't whole, perfect, infinite, eternal. So it is impossible that you are not that. It is difficult for the untrained mind to believe that what it seems to picture is not there. The idea can be quite disturbing and meet with active resistance in any number of forms. Yet, and this is the caveat, yet that does not preclude applying the idea. The only thing that can keep you from applying the idea is unwillingness to do so in the following of the directions that you're given in any given day with these exercises. Because even if it's disturbing you, you can still say it, you can still apply it. Even if you don't believe it, you can still apply it. Now, that doesn't make sense in the thinking of the world, but in the undoing of the egoic thought system, in its total regard, not just one of these thoughts. It seems like we're working with individual thoughts, but we're really working with the entirety of the system all the time. So if we can undo on any one single thought, the entire structure will fall. It's like a house of cards. No more than that is required for these or any other exercises. Some of the application, as he says, we're concerned with practice, not with understanding. Understanding is the booby prize that the ego offers us in order to satiate you for a single instant, so it can confuse you enough to ask the same question in another form 5 minutes later. Each small step, he goes on to say, will clear a little of the darkness away, and understanding will finally come to lighten every corner of the mind that has been cleared of the debris that darkens it. And I want to assure you that there is no promise that is ever made by the author of A Course in Miracles, and I just call him Jesus, that he does not keep. And I'm a living example of that. He's made promises to me, and over a course of time made good on absolutely everything he said, and this is no exception. At the bottom, there's another line, and he says, after you do the exercise, I don't see what the coffee, I don't see that coat rack as it is now. I don't see this cup as it is now. I see nothing as it is now. So it is emphasized again that while complete inclusion should not be attempted, specific exclusion must be avoided. And here he says, be sure you are honest with yourself in making this distinction. You may be tempted to obscure it. And he brings in the point of honesty, which I think is good. Don't kid yourself. You know, somewhere inside of us, we all know what we're doing. And part of the reason why complete inclusion should not be attempted, nor is it even necessary, as a matter of fact, is because we're dealing with an unstable thought system that can collapse entirely all at once if any one given thought can be shown to be unreal by the light of the truth that is within us. And that's what these exercises are about, helping us see the unreality of the thought system that we've been utilizing in order for us to learn to think in an entirely new way, to bring about a different result to our sojourn into darkness, to our sojourn in space and time. So that will be today's lesson, and thanks for listening.